This is the second of 3 videos about different aspects of notation software and things that you might want to think about when you're writing your own music on this software. Here is solo violin sounds from a bunch of software, playing a tune by Beethoven. Here we go. Okay, so that was from the Logic, stock solo violin sound. Here's one which comes free with Finale. And this is the one that comes free with Note Flight. I don't actually mind that one, and that's a free piece of software. Here's the one that comes with Sibelius. So you can see, all really different to each other. Let's look at how different instruments react to being played fast or slow. And we'll start with instruments that you hit or pluck. Now, because of the nature of a sound like that, you just hit it and then it gradually decays the volume away in one go. It doesn't really matter if you play them fast or slow. They always sound great. I can play slowly, harp sound, great, but I can also play it fast. Also sounds really pretty good. Same with something like pizzicato strings. I could play something slow. Sounds good, but I could also play something fast. Also sounds good. Same with percussion sounds. They're always going to sound great. No problem playing fast or slow. Whereas sounds that are blown, sounds which require you breathing, more variable. So this French horn sound, for example, this is a brass instrument, that big round one, if you don't know it. Kind of okay. But if I try and play something fast, it doesn't really sound that real. In fact, I'm going to play you clarinet. Okay. Pretty persuasive, slow. Actually pretty good, fast. You hear a lot of clarinet in medio music, and partly because I think the samples just sound so great, and you'll often find the same with sax, that it sounds pretty good. Sax and clarinet are related instruments. Or a choir. Pretty good, but if I try and play something fast, you'll hear it stop sounding like a choir. It's actually, the sound isn't even quite speaking. I'm trying to go da 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 da, and it's not even doing it. Can't really even hear the attack of the note. I suppose I'm suggesting that you might start writing a piece for piano, drums, and clarinet because it sounds good. But what if your original idea was to write for oboe and choir? Are you letting the software decide what you're writing for, or are you making your own decisions? Solo instruments versus groups of instruments, or sections of instruments, as we sometimes call them. Basically, you'll find that some sounds, even really good ones, like this trumpet sound, is pretty good. But often sections where you've got massed groups of instruments playing together just have that kind of satisfying warmth. So here we are in Finale. I'm going to play you an example of a Mozart piece, just using the stock sounds. This is with the solo string sounds. Okay, usable, helpful. Here's another example using the group string sound. I think much more satisfying sound. Kind of more pleasant to work with, even if you're writing for solo instruments. Just a bit more pleasant. Just for reference, here's what it sounds like played by a string quartet. So 3 really, really different experiences. Next thing, range, by which I mean high notes, low notes, middle notes. That's the range of any instrument. Let's say you're working with a solo violin sound and you're messing around with high notes and you're thinking, does that really sound good? Maybe I shouldn't use that idea if the violin sounds like that. But listen to this example here. Here is a high note played by Finale. Quite piercing. And here is the phrase played for real. That's a much nicer, sweeter sound. Here's another example. Take this bit of clarinet here. It's a high bit of clarinet. Here it is by Finale. Pretty good. Now, clarinet is one of the best instruments, but I find those high notes just a little bit shrill, and you might be tempted to not use them. Hear what it sounds like when played by the original. Quite sweet, actually. Not too high, no problem. Expressiveness. It's kind of obvious, isn't it, that the real musicians are going to instantly, without you telling them, put in more expression than a computer program is likely to. Take this example here. So this score here, all I did, you can see, I've just written in mournfully. So you could write any sort of descriptive word which just gives your players something to go on, but you have to bear in mind that the software won't play it back. So I could have put joyfully or expressively or something like that, which would give the players a completely different tone. You can see just by writing mournfully, listen to the way that they play this. Okay, and listen to what Finale does. So there's little things that it hasn't done. That, for example, it hasn't put in this little slide there. Can you hear that? Slide. I didn't ask them to play it, but they did play it. Here it is by Finale. If I put the slide in, well, it sort of sounds okay, but definitely doesn't sound as beautifully played as the real thing. So I suppose what I'm saying is that even if you haven't put in detail in your score, just with a description of the vibe of your tune, that will give the players quite a lot to go on into how they interpret your music. Dynamics, loud or soft. Just bear in mind that the instruments on your software are usually, they're just recordings of real instruments, but they've usually recorded them just, if you're lucky, once quiet and once loud. They don't do the gradual in-between stages in most of the instruments that are thrown in with your program. So some expensive instruments have a lot of layers of sampling. So this piano here, you can hear as I play different levels of loudness. It doesn't just get louder, but it changes the tone from being bright to mellow. Just like on a real piano. So if you just look at this example in Finale, I'll do exactly the same thing, going from really soft to really, really loud. And you'll hear that although it gets louder, the tone doesn't really change that much. Okay, or listen to this example here. Here you'll hear the cello going from a really quiet note and crescendoing through to a loud note. Here is that played by a real cello. Can you hear how much more audio information there is in that sound? It actually goes from a sort of mellow sound to a bright sound as it gets louder. And it's such a gorgeous sound, that crescendo. You might be tempted with software to think, it's not so good, maybe I won't do that, or maybe I'll add something. Whereas in fact, that is quite enough. It's quite an interesting sound to hear just by itself. Here's another example of a very dynamic piece of music with lots of louds and quiets. Not bad, but listen to the original. You can really hear the dynamism of the piano, and the delicateness of the strings. And how that soft piano just feels completely different. Just so much more shocking and more intense, the dynamics. So tempo fluctuations, getting faster or getting slower. If you don't put them in your score, you may not hear them back as you intended. Having said that, be aware that players will naturally put in very slight adjustments to their playing, even if you haven't asked for it, just because naturally, maybe because of the style of the piece. For example, listen to this, the beginning of this Beethoven example that we've been using. There's no instruction saying to slow down at any point in the first few seconds of this piece, but listen to what they've done. And they've just done that naturally, even though you haven't asked for it. So just be aware that musicians will want to pull tempo around, but you might not hear that. In fact, you won't hear it on the software unless you put in, the sign for slowing down, like a rit or a ral sign. Detail. It's interesting with a lot of student scores, you see that there's no markings of tempo, of bowing, whether to bow in one go or whether to bow lots of notes together in one bow. Same with breath, whether to just blow 15 notes with one breath, where you put a slur over the top, or whether to play each note with a new breath. Or any of the different articulations of staccato and legato, playing notes short or long. Here's a version of the Beethoven piece that we've been listening to without anything written on it. Now for the musician, but what you'll find is that they will just play everything flat. Whereas if you look at the actual score, it's actually so different combinations of notes joined together and separate. So this is relevant if you're getting it played by real musicians, because obviously they will play what is written on the page, but it's also relevant just to hearing it back well. Listen to how this sounds in the example with no detail. Okay, so that's fine, but listen to the one with detail. So much clearer. So I would advise that when you're putting in a tune into a notation software, sing it to yourself out loud. You don't have to sing it accurately in terms of notes, but about the articulations. So do you want your melody to be every note the same volume and the same length? Da, 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 da. Sing it out loud, and then it'll play it back like that. But you might want to hear your tune like this, and you'd sing it out loud. Da, 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 da. Completely different sound. And Finale's doing a pretty decent job of playing it back to you as you heard it in your head. Or maybe you've got a volume thing. Maybe you want it like that. And again, it'll play it back. Dynamics aren't great, but it's okay. And there's lots of other markings you can add, like big accents. And these marks over here, which bow things together so that they sound like da-da-da-da-da, rather than ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Crucial ideas. The same thing is true, especially of the woodwind instruments, where a short note and a long note sound really different to each other. So please put in detail in your scores and your musicians will appreciate it.
For me, actually, from a performer's side, I think make your composition as readable as possible. So make it clear, have very clear instructions. A lot of the time, musicians wouldn't have seen it before. So you want to make their jobs easy and to save rehearsal time as well, because these things also, cost money. So you have to think about that kind of thing as well, making everyone's lives easier. So how it looks is really important, I think.
Just remember also that a lot of instruments, sometimes that come free with your packages. I'm thinking of studio strings on Logic, which you can port through to your software program. They have different articulations available to you, which you can switch between. So it could be, you can have the plucked sound for one bar, and you can have a tremolendo sound, like for the next bar, and then a normal sound for the next bar. You've got those options, and you can switch between them. One thing I'd really like to mention at this point is that since writing this episode, I've become aware of a piece of software called Note Performer, which is an ingenious piece of software that's been written to be integrated into either Finale or Sibelius or Dorico, and radically improves, I would say, the experience of working with notation software. It doesn't work with the free programs as yet, but if you do own one of those paid-for programs, I would really recommend that you take a look at it. I've been working with it for the last couple of weeks, and I've found that it's obviously not perfect, and there's still a gap between what you hear and what you might expect from a live instrument, but it's a much closer approximation of what you're likely to get, especially with larger instrument groups. Some styles of music just sound better on notation software. We heard that example from before with that really fast string quartet piece. That wasn't very successful, whereas this piece, which I'm about to play you, which is by William Byrd, which I've done an arrangement of for string quartet, sounds pretty good. I feel like I'm not going to get any nasty surprises when I hear the real version, that it'll sound pretty similar. Let's give it a go. Okay, the software wasn't doing lots of things, those beautiful little swells that the musicians are playing, which I haven't even written in. They're just naturally playing some notes louder or softer. But I feel like I could definitely use the notation software as a pretty good guide. And do check out our third and final video on another aspect of notation software.